question there.
One on behalf of Mark Taylor-Canfield, a journalist from Seattle. So, how can public funds be used to finance investigative journalism without creating conflict of interest? It's a very good question.
Yeah, very good question. So one is one of my questions that, for example, in Hungary, we have a lot of public funding for media. The question is not if the money is there, but how to make it independent and working well.
Welcome to the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield. We offer you independent voices and underreported stories about topics you won't hear anywhere else. Join us as we delve into the deeper issues behind the news stories of the day on the MTC Report.
This is Mark Taylor-Canfield. I'm a journalist. I write at the Capitol Hill Times. I also blog at Daily Kos. I'm vice president of Democracy Watch News. And I also appear regularly on the Jeff Santos Show, broadcasting from Boston. So let's have that open, honest discussion of American politics and the American democracy, or republic, which would be more accurate. But these ideals that were based upon the Enlightenment, you know, freedom and equality, this pushback against monarchies, survived into the colonies of the United States, which then fought for independence from Great Britain and the British Empire. Well, the American Empire has become its own institution around the world. And so now we have a different situation. And just for folks who don't live in the United States, let's talk openly and honestly here, okay? It's just you and me, right? This is what's going on from an American point of view, from a journalist's point of view in the United States. First of all, we have problems with our democracy, for sure, okay? Reporters Without Borders, which is an international advocacy group for journalism and freedom of the press, ranks the United States as 43rd in the world. That means there are 42 other countries where freedom of the press is more highly valued and there's more open access to the workings of your government than in the United States of America. There's a lot of secrecy in the United States. There's a lot of justification used of national security for keeping information from people and from journalists. Whistleblowers have been prosecuted in the past, and there's no shield or protection law for journalists when they're forced to reveal their sources. They end up having to go to jail because they can't find legal protection. So these are some of the problems that journalists in the United States are facing. And in terms of our electoral system, well, let's face it, I mean, the Electoral College was set up, back in the 1700s, and this is an outmoded form of electing people. It's not really even democratic because there's this college of electors, which is more like the electors of Hanover or whatever, in the early medieval days or ancient days of Europe, electors who could choose who the king is. Well, also you should realize that in the United States we have a presidency, which is a system of government which is different from a parliament system, a parliamentary system, which is most of Europe, and the European Parliament itself is a parliamentary system, obviously, and then the European Union and the British Empire has always been parliamentary, so the Commonwealth tends to use parliamentary procedures and parliaments as part of their governance. Well, the United States is a presidency, and there was a battle amongst the Democrats versus the Federalists at that time, which was folks like Thomas Jefferson versus some of the folks who felt like, we should have a king, and they should appoint George Washington as king. And he did refuse that, but at the same time, there were folks who felt like there needed to be a powerful figure behind the United States government in order to keep everybody together. Strong executive power, which is what the U.S. presidency has become, unfortunately, which is not necessarily completely democratic. Also, we have the Electoral College, which is a bunch of people who are appointed by their own political parties in each state of the United States, in the Union, to cast a vote for a political candidate for a U.S. president, which in this last election ended up being Donald Trump. So he did not win the popular vote. He did not win the majority of the votes that were cast by Americans during that election. He did win, however, the Electoral College. Now, try to explain that to somebody from Europe or someone where they really believe that they have a democracy, and you're going to have a difficult time explaining how that works. But that's what happened in the United States. Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. Donald Trump did not, but Donald Trump won the presidency, okay, because of the Electoral College. Figure that out. Look it up. Do the research yourself. You'll figure this out, how that works. So there's a problem. Also, there were a lot of allegations of voting fraud across the country. Big problems in New York during the primary between Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination. Huge problems in California. Problems in Arizona. I mean, court cases and battles over this stuff. So, also accusations of hacking. States using voting machines which are 10-year-old technology, which can easily be hacked, and you have all sorts of issues. The Russians have been brought in, and the whole thing of Russiagate, and then also, somehow hacking the election. Although those are unsubstantiated at this point, there are a lot of problems with the elections in the United States without the Russians even being involved, okay? Let me tell you, as a journalist in the United States, we have a lot of challenges to democracy in this country. Also, the Supreme Court, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that corporations are, as persons, have freedom of speech, which means they can spend as much money supporting candidates as they want, and candidates can raise as much money as they want when they're running for office, which is quite different from places like even in Great Britain, where there are limitations on the amount of money that can be spent, where candidates the candidates' campaigns are publicly funded, and where there's a very short election period. In the United States, elections go on for years at a time. There's a lot of money that is raised to bankroll people. It's $1 billion industry, the elections in the United States, and it leads to the fact that only very super wealthy people usually get elected. In the case of Bernie Sanders, he almost became the Democratic Party's nominee. He's not a super wealthy man. He's definitely not a multi-billionaire. But typically free speech is equated with money, and money is equated with free speech in the United States, and that was because of a U.S. Supreme Court called Citizens United, which is very unpopular with a lot of people who are in the pro-democracy movements around this country.
Don't go anywhere. The MTC Report with Mark Taylor-Canfield continues next.
Another election, another convention, another media intervention, another reason, another season to vote for.
So that's what we're facing in the United States. We do not have proportional representation, which in a parliamentary system would allow the Greens, or whatever third or alternative party, the Libertarians or whoever, to have a certain number of representatives in the government because 5% or whatever percentage of the people voted for that party. Unfortunately, we don't have that in the United States. There are some places, Cambridge, Massachusetts, where my friend Jeff Santos, whose weekly show broadcasting nationally from Boston I'm on, the Jeff Santos Show every week, he is running for the Cambridge City Council, and they do have proportional representation there. So there are some efforts in the United States on the local level for there to be proportional representation, instant voter runoff, instant voting runoff, all sorts of issues that create more of a sense of democracy where more people are represented.
This is the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield.
We can have a world-class healthcare system without waiting lines.
So let's face it, you won't get straight talk like this many places in the United States. The corporate media is owned by a handful of corporations who are entertainment mega media corporations. So their main motivation is to create profit, right? And to sell their products. So, don't be surprised if there's a certain amount of censorship that goes on. It's not a state-controlled media like you might find in other countries. It's actually a corporate-controlled media, and so most independent and actually progressive and voices on the left are shut out. That's the truth, okay? You can say what you want to about the bias of U.S. media, but the truth is that people who have left-leaning points of view, progressives, don't get programs on Clear Channel or Cumulus-owned networks. Okay, that's just or stations. That's just not the way it goes. So that's the situation in the United States, and now you have a president who speaks out against the media all the time and calls the press the enemy of the people, which is, very much a dictatorial sort of statement. That's something a demagogue would say, and it's not a good sign. Freedom of the press is something that's very important and needs to be supported in the United States. But I just wanted to be honest about, what's going on in this country. And if you talk to folks in other parts of the world who have more functioning democracies, they're very skeptical. Our stance in the nation, our status as a country in the international community has suffered after the election of Donald Trump because of some of the statements he's made, which are less than diplomatic, as we might say. So that's the situation. If you're looking for open, transparent democracy, and if you're looking for a place where money does not control the elections, because that's what's happening here. I mean, it was just a shocking turn of events that Bernie Sanders even became as well known and this won as many primary elections as he did across the country. He won every county in Washington state, by the way. And Hillary Clinton, I think, only got up to 40% in one county. Bernie Sanders won some counties in Washington state by 80%. So, especially in the Northwest, in places like Alaska, Hawaii, Washington, Oregon, California, he's very, very, very popular. Okay, and they're not worried that he's a democratic socialist, because as long as there's democracy involved, then they're okay with socialism. I mean, we need to take care of people. That's what they say. His supporters, the Bernie-crats, which would include the Our Revolution folks and a lot of folks in Democracy for America. Those are two big groups that I would put in the Bernie-crat camp, and they probably wouldn't complain about that. I don't know. Maybe they would. But, let's face it, there's a lot of apathy in the United States about media in general. There's a lot of apathy, a lot of mistrust of media, and things that are considered fake news by the president are real, and then things that are real news are considered fake. Things that are real news are considered fake by the president because it encompasses views criticizing his administration. And then, news that is fake gets passed on as real. So it's a very difficult situation. But people, the consumer of media and the audience has to practice discretion, and they have to practice discernment and become media literate. You have to understand the biases that all of these news agencies and organizations and political agencies have, and why they're saying the things they're saying. You need to be able to analyze it and understand where they're coming from. And then, you can put it into context and take it with a grain of salt, you know what I'm saying? Because all media has a certain kind of bias, okay? You can't get away from that. Every human being has a certain kind of bias. It doesn't matter whether you're a journalist or a doctor or a scientist or whatever, or a police officer, you have a certain bias. It's just the way human beings are built. So what we have to do is try to be professional, and there are standards of ethics in journalism and other fields that hold you to a certain behavioral guidelines, which keeps you within these boundaries of respectable behavior, so that you don't practice your prejudice, and that it doesn't color your reporting or your scientific work, or whatever field you happen to be in. You can have a certain kind of objectivity if you adhere to certain professional standards of ethics. I wouldn't say that the United States has been great at holding journalists and editors and publications and news agencies to those higher standards, but we can do better. There's hope, and there still is a First Amendment which protects the government, at least, from violating freedom of the press and freedom of speech and freedom of expression. So thank goodness for that. It has kept us from becoming a complete totalitarian dictatorship. Okay, I'm just telling you. But there's a lot of apathy in the American system of politics and electoral politics, especially. People don't believe, in general, don't believe that their vote counts, and there are a lot of independents. I would say the majority of Americans now consider themselves independent. They do not trust the Democrats or the Republicans at this point. There's a lot of corruption and extremism in both parties, and the Democrats have been accused by even the progressives of being sort of a corporatist party now and having sold out to major corporations and Wall Street, which there's some degree of truth to that. And the Republicans have become very much a sort of right-wing, fundamentalist, Christian, conservative group. So, just not necessarily, a part of their original roots. But that's the situation today. So anybody that wants to be independent or represent a third party or an alternative party, you are left out of the mix. Let me tell you, this is a winner-take-all system in the United States. Money talks in politics in the United States.
This is the MTC Report, the news behind the news with journalist Mark Taylor-Canfield.
I've been criticized.
Now here's a place you always need a lot of friends.
And I live in this country, the United States. It probably would be more accurate to call it residents of the United States rather than Americans who live here, because there are also South Americans, and there are a lot of other North Americans in Canada and Mexico, and Central Americans who are left out of that equation. But I live in this country, and I want to see the best of democracy for this country. I want to see the best interests of this country served, and the poor people and the struggling people and the uneducated folks and everybody who needs a lending hand get some help somewhere along the way, because I see so much poverty in the United States. I see so much homelessness in cities like San Francisco, Seattle, New York City. It's terrible. It's like there's so many people living under bridges and living in tent cities around the country. Right now it's estimated that in Seattle there are over 400 individual encampments, 10,000 people in Martin Luther King Jr. County in Washington State, where Seattle is located, who have no permanent housing. And I'm sure that Dr. King would not be proud of that fact, in the county that was named after him. So there are many things that we need to deal with in this country. It's not all about the money. It's not all about the buck. It's about people. It's about the environment. It's about how we treat each other and what kind of a nation we are, what kind of character we have as a people. And, and how do we embrace diversity, and how do we become a successful country, and what does that mean to be successful? Does it mean just having the largest corporations in the world, some of the richest people in the world living here, the most powerful military? No, there are many other things that you can be successful at as a country besides those specific things. And so I'm very concerned about freedom of the press, and freedom of religion, and freedom of expression, freedom of speech in the United States. I'm just glad that we still have a First Amendment, and groups that try to support these rights, that are guaranteed in our U.S. Constitution, which makes us different, than most other countries. The Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution is a very powerful set of principles about individual rights, and we need to stand by those. We can't let that go just because of partisan political beliefs or religious beliefs, or some kind of conspiracy theories. We need to really hold on to the fact that we are a free nation at heart. That's what we want here. That's what most people who live in the United States want. They want the freedom to think and believe and do what they believe is in their best interest and the best interest of other folks. But I just wanted to be honest as a journalist. It's my obligation to speak out for democracy and against any kind of oppression or oligarchy, which is what Bernie Sanders talks about. So I have to continue reporting on these issues and letting people know that even in a city as progressive as Seattle, where I live, there are many people who are suffering because capitalism does not solve all of our problems, and neither does socialism or any other ism. But I just want people to know that there's a lot of censorship that goes on inside the media. This is not your typical media-approved, corporate media-approved line of thinking or messaging. This is an individual, independent journalist living in the United States, trying to tell the rest of the world and his fellow citizens, and residents of this country what's going on. These are my honest impressions. I'm just trying to tell the truth. I want the best for this country. I want things to improve, so I want to tell the truth about it, because the first thing we have to do is face the truth. And we need true democracy movements in this country. I'm very concerned that one pro-democracy movement, the Bernie Sanders campaign, got subverted and sabotaged by the leadership of the Democratic Party. That was not good for democracy in the United States, I think. So the Democratic Party really has some problems, and of course so do the Republicans. Both political parties in the United States are falling apart, and they're also alienating a lot of the rest of the country and a lot of their own members. So some change needs to happen. There needs to be more diverse political opinions for populations who don't normally get a voice in the U.S. corporate media. I mean, that's the problem, right? It's so monopolized by corporate money and celebrity status, and people with $300 haircuts and $1,000 suits. That there are so many people on YouTube just doing their own thing and being themselves, because I think that kind of authenticity is the future, and a lot of people understand that, and that's why they're just doing their own thing independently without corporate sponsorship from political parties or advertisers or whatever, just trying to do their own thing and tell the truth. It's very important. We need to keep media democracy alive. So I want to appreciate all of you for listening to me, and those of you who have supported me as a journalist and musician and have checked out the over 350, I think, videos now that have been uploaded to my YouTube channel, and all the free movies there, and cartoon animations and music. Thanks for coming back and checking out my MTC report, which is my regular broadcast there on journalism and my editorial comments about politics and culture. Thanks for checking out my videos with Jeff Santos, where he's broadcasting there from Boston nationally, and we do a lot of stuff together. I'm there at least once a month, sometimes twice a month, talking to him as a guest journalist on his program, and he's a great guy, very honest, independent speaker in the media. So thanks for supporting us and Democracy Watch News. I'm actually executive director of Democracy Watch News, which is a non-profit international news organization. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook, Democracy Watch News. So thanks to all of you for listening, and please continue to support independent media. That's my main theme in almost all the media I do, is support independent media, support people who are trying to tell the truth and be authentically themselves and not going through some kind of corporate or political or religious or whatever cultural filter.